All right, welcome to Esoteric Lectures. Thank you for joining us. Today is another movie review, quite a special one. We're going to be reviewing and analyzing Blade Runner 2049. Movie is very Gnostic, so this is why we decided to review it. And before I review it, Johnny made a point to me to let everybody know and let you know that this will be a spoiler alert. So we're going to spoil it for you. So if you don't want to get the movie spoiled, wait until you see it and then come back and watch. If you don't care, then, cool. But we will be going over the movie from front to end. So, and I will be, Monday, this will go live. So I'm going to be putting pictures in there of certain scenes from the movie that you can follow along as you listen when I go and edit it, and it'll go live Monday. So just let everybody know that we will be going over the movie. So if you haven't seen it yet, just keep that in mind. Johnny also made a point to me to say that we might go over a little bit. We usually do an hour. So today we might go over a little bit more than we usually do because it's a long movie and a lot of stuff to cover. And almost every scene in this film was a note. While I was watching this movie, I had to stop it at like almost every 5 to 10 seconds or every 5 to 10 minutes to make a note of every scene in the movie, because literally every scene in the movie is a Gnostic note in that. So with that being said, a lot of notes to go over today, and I think you guys really enjoy what we have presented for you. So with that being said, let's get into the meat and bones of this thing. So I'm going to do a little intro, and I'm going to throw it to you, Johnny. Blade Runner 2049 is the new remake of the original Blade Runner. It does star Harrison Ford in it, as the original one did, and also the main character is Ryan Gosling. The movie was very watchable. It was not a SJW intensive movie like you might have think. There is some scenes in the film in which a lot of our MGTOW viewers will catch very quickly that shows a lot of feministic type of tendencies, if you will, that might kind of throw it off, but it does not ruin the movie. The movie was, that did not take away from the actual enjoyment of watching the movie. So that's not something that you have to worry about. It was a very Gnostic movie. I saw it, Johnny and I watched the movie, and we saw that this film was something that we thought would be great to review on the channel. So we decided to do that. So with that being said, the first thing I'd like to kind of go over is, I guess what I'll do is I'll start right from my first part of the notes that I've made for this thing as I was going through it. And it kind of goes in a little bit about kind of more of the MGTOW side, kind of right off the bat. But there is a scene in the very beginning where the Ryan Gosling's character talks to this holographic kind of girlfriend that is like a virtual girlfriend robot, hologram, not a robot, but a hologram. And he also responds the same way to, he's an LAPD officer. So he has to say, "Yes, ma'am," in this movie, which I made a note to say that it was very kind of off-putting, simply because, we do have MGTOW viewers here, and I come from that mindset and understanding that kind of thing definitely sticks out to me like a sore thumb. So Johnny, I mentioned that to you. I kind of was like, this is kind of off-putting that the whole society, at least in Blade Runner, was kind of very feminine intensive. It was very centered towards this Queen Lilithian age worship. What do you got to say about that? And I'm gonna leave that to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Johnny Midnight. As always, it was. Officer K is a replicant, and they let you know about that right off the get-go. There's no wondering whether or not what his nature is. We know right from the beginning that K is a replicant, and it's 30 years after the first, or 40 years after the first movie. And this new era of replicants have no free will. And they test whether or not the replicant has free will. We're going to get into that scene a little bit later on, but and if they do start showing evidence of free will, they're going to get rebooted. because they don't want the powers that be do not want these replicants going rogue again. And yeah, Officer K has a quote unquote girlfriend who is a hologram that is affixed to his ceiling by this this emanation machine that creates her form, and it basically is her hard drive. The funny thing is, her name is Joy, Joi, which in the porn world, that stands for jack off instructions. She's a masturbation machine, basically. And Officer K is basically, I guess you could say, cucked, because his boss is a human with free will, but that boss is a female, so he is subservient to this woman. He has no free will. This woman is basically there to make sure that he does not develop one either.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, that was one part of that movie that kind of illustrated the previous hangouts that we've done, which is going into the Lilithian age, where, you know, and this also goes into what I believe we've touched upon a little bit, which is that this Lilithian goddess worship is definitely made known in the film with these subtleties, these subliminals. I caught a lot of subliminals in this film right off the bat. One of the subliminals that I caught that I thought was very obvious to me was that because, you know, she's a hologram, he can't actually physically touch her. But what they made subliminal about it was almost what it was, the way I saw it, was that it was illustrating respect to a goddess is what it was showing. Not to touch the goddess. Don't disrespect the goddess. Now, yes, they described that as, they kind of threw that in there because she was a hologram. He couldn't touch her. But the subliminal to that, to people who don't, psychologically speaking, that's kind of illustrating goddess worship. It's separating the separation between the man and the woman. It's showing that there is no... there is a separation of unworthiness, in a sense, where you have to say yes, ma'am. The women don't say yes, sir. It's only yes, ma'am. And so Joy, being this kind of shining figure amongst the city, overlooking the city as this nude type of hologram prostitute, like Lilith, basically, overlooking herself amongst the city, like the Whore of Babylon, almost, in terms of a pretext way of looking at it.
Yeah, right. Her form is generated, you know, gigantically. The girl's about as tall as a building.
Yeah. And that was very telling, I think, in a lot of ways, to which we've talked about with this, you know, Lilithian age, this goddess worship that is beginning to show itself more and more in society now, especially with the recent stuff that's come out and now in Hollywood, where we have now Oprah claiming to run for president. I mean, that's hilarious. We also have the whole sexual assault witch hunt that's going on. Whether or not it's true or not, the point is that they're doing it. And, you know, this is beginning to become much more of a increased phenomenon, to say the least. So when the movies come out with these kind of subliminals, what it's showing you is that movies are basically modern day hieroglyphics. They represent the current status of society replicated in film. And so if it's in the movies, it's going on in the culture. And, you know, that just kind of, just to finish up that specific part, everything that we've been discussing here on Esoteric Lectures and the rest of the channel, we have been trying to put this point across, that there is this uprising happening, where this Lilithian goddess worship is beginning to make itself truly known. You know, what do you think, Johnny?
Sure, it's predictive programming. I'm not saying that in an Alex Jones sense where, it's like, yeah, they're trying to tell you something. I think that it's already well known. They're just reminding you, the general public, that this is the social dynamic we have now, and it's just going to become more pronounced as time goes on, and there's really nothing we can do to stop it. You certainly can't go to your congressman, try to lobby against it, or write something in a Freedom of Information Act comment section and hope that you'll be able to reverse something like this from happening. It's just not going to work.
Yeah, and these subliminals that that go throughout this film, and subliminals in various other movies. It's a form of brainwashing. It's a form of predictive programming. It's a form of subliminal control. That your mind, if you don't know how to read that, it's gonna take influence amongst people that don't understand what that is. And so they put that in the movies so that people can, kind of subliminally think that that's the norm based upon the culture. So it's a direct reflection. The movie, we've mentioned this concept, as above, so below. The movie, and the way that when you sit into a movie theater, you're looking through the veil, and you're looking through the veil into the representation of the world that it is now. So you're looking through a mirrored reflection of your world on the other side, represented in a movie. Almost like looking into the future. Almost, it's like a giant monolith looking into another dimension of the future, being promoted or telecasted through predictive programming, predicting the future in a movie. Another thing that I just kind of wanted to mention about that joy hologram is something that Paul Affley mentioned, which was the Femi Sapien. Paul Affley, and I'm just going to go over this briefly because he's a whole nother show, but he did mention something called the Sexuality of Robots, which he mentioned that eventually in the future, as we move forward, in a nutshell, basically, people will basically kind of be integrated with robotics, or the transhumanist sense of the word, and people will be kind of becoming integrated with cybernetic existence. Eventually, the Femi Sapien represented the goddess, or what we now know as Lilith, main tenant, or the main point in which she is worshipped amongst a cybernetic existence. That goes into a whole nother subject that could relate to.
True, but like also that the Femi Sapien is going to be here in the Corposa. She'll be a prime material reality figurehead. She will coexist with us right here in this reality. Just like that showing in Blade Runner 2049.
It's almost like they're taking a holographic representation of Lilith to kind of, it's like if Lilith was to interact herself in this reality, well, she would kind of do it through AI and holograms. So it's kind of like her representative in a way.
Sure, why not? I mean, the Femi Sapien, in my supposition, is the Antichrist.
Yes.
I mean, do you agree on that? Because, I mean, that just kind of like dawned upon me. You and I had been, studied lawfully quite a bit. And it finally got, dawned on me just while you were talking here about the nature of the Femi Sapien. And that figure to me is representative of what could be come the Antichrist.
I agree. I was going to go there, but I wasn't sure yet.
That's another show, but yeah, just
yeah. Yeah, I agree with what you said. I believe that I think that a lot of this Lilithian worship. We were discussing this with a film that we saw, in which was depicting the story basically of kind of the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve. And Jehovah basically created man first. In the Bible, it talks about how God created man and then he created woman. So this movie was showing that what was kind of going on here was that basically Lilith, or the woman that was made after man, Lilith, came down, and Jehovah left her because she was out screwing all the dudes, and the dudes were screwing her. So he got mad and left. that would be the corposa kind of reality that we exist in now. And basically, what then occurred was that she took over the kingdom here, and that's why, you know, I've talked about this on my other channel. And I said that the devil of this world is probably a woman, or will take form of a woman due to that inevitability. I think that was the point. So, you know, I agree with what you said. I think that, you know, this whole promotion now of trying to get a woman into the presidency, if a woman gets in the presidency, you know, watch that like a hawk, because you might be seeing something that, you know, might be developing the first initial possibility of a Lilith becoming the president, and then that would be the Antichrist.
Yeah, sure. And maybe, like we were just talking about, maybe it might not even be human. You know, it might be something, you know, President Google, President Microsoft, President Apple. And it is, you know, a generated simulation of a woman. And this generated simulation is what will rule over us.
I heard a, and this is kind of off topic, but it does relate to Blade Runner, that I did hear. I don't know, I don't remember where I heard this, but I heard that at some point the next president, or some along the lineage of who will be the next person, either in the near future or down the line, it will be a computer. They will put up a computer due to the fact that there's so much instability. People believe that if they put a computer into the White House, like as an AI, then it could run the system much better. And so due to unrest and civil unrest, they could use that as an excuse to put in an AI to run the country. So that could be one of those kind of points in which could manifest into what you mentioned there.
It wouldn't be too terribly. No, I know, but I mean, I could see that type of event ushering in that sort of rulership dynamic for us. I actually foresee it happening in Europe before here, but you never know. You never know.
The test bed. Well, let's move on to the next part of this Blade Runner movie, which was that is a key theme that we've been discussing, which is that of androgyny and this mending of man and woman and man in the same body, basically. We haven't gotten into too much detail about this. We've kind of hinted at androgyny, but androgyny in this movie is quite, it's not too intensive, but there are specific characters that emulate androgyny, and certain key scenes that I will interject in the editing. When I put this up Monday, you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. But in Blade Runner, there is a Ryan Gosling's character, his boss. She has a slicked combed back hair. She wears an all black suit, and she's very masculine. And she's a female. So this is a very kind of androgynous, would you say, Johnny?
Yeah, she's sort of like the prototypical ball breaker archetype. She's not actually rendered as a terribly bad boss, but at the same time, she does let Officer K know that she is in control and that he does not have any free will under her.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember there was one specific scene that was mentioned, and I'll quote a line from the movie. "The world is built on a wall that separates the kind. Tell either side there's no wall and you've bought a war or a slaughter." In this specific scene, Officer K, which was Ryan Gosling's character, right, Johnny?
That's right.
Okay. Officer K's boss basically says this line, and there's another subliminal right there, you know, and that kind of goes into the whole thing of the political issue. That's what the general public will assume the subliminal is being, but in the Gnostic sense, that wall is the veil. And that is very telling of the situation that's kind of going on in 2049 and the current timeline that they're at, and kind of what this movie in the Gnostic sense is trying to illustrate here. And she did say something about having a soul that I thought I thought in the beginning, could this be Lilith? Which was that she said, Officer K goes, he was mentioning something about feelings and having a soul. And she goes, you've been getting fine without one. And he goes, what? And she goes, a soul.
Yeah, and she, again, she tries to pull rank over him and dominate, show her dominance by reminding him that he is a lesser life form because he's not a life form. He does not have the pneuma. He does not have a soul. And with the quote about the wall and tearing down the veil, that is true. If the general public learned about the hypostatic relationship between the corposa and the Heil, and why our creator doesn't really love us, we'd flip our shit. There would be, nuclear war in 10 minutes. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Another aspect to that, and I just remembered, I forgot that Officer K was a replicant. He was, to me, when I watched the movie, I forgot he was. He acted so real, versus the original Blade Runner. The replicants were still minutely robotic to a degree. And they even mentioned it, that these new series are much more upgraded. The Lilith character, which we'll get into later on down the line here, it actually mentions that specifically. And that kind of goes into the other aspect of the fact that Officer K is a replicant, where he says, you remember he goes through that test where he says souls interlinked, cells interlinked. Officer K, after every mission, he gets debriefed in this room that he's just hounded by this person on the other side, which I guess that could be kind of equated to a speaking through the other side of the veil, if you will. They're his bosses.
Yeah, you don't get to see the interrogator. He's actually just like a plate in a wall with a monitor. Well, not a monitor, but a camera lens in the middle. A black hole.
Yeah, and that's kind of illustrating HAL 9000. It's illustrating the AI system that kind of is in play here, at least alluding to it. I showed Johnny a short film from a guy. What was his name? John C. Not John C. Reilly. Oh gosh, the guy that directed the Prometheus movie.
Ridley Scott. Right? Was that called Loop?
It was called Loop. Yeah, I think it was not. Maybe it was Loom. Loom is what it was called.
Loom.
And the same premise there was shown. The thing looked exactly like HAL, in which a guy who was working in this company is questioned in front of an artificial intelligence, literally with the red eye and a monolithic cube, just like HAL, of a female voice coming through asking him, are you feeling any intimate emotions today? Do you have attraction to the opposite sex? This is showing that the whole society will be ruled, I guess, in many respects, through this AI, Lilithian, Antichrist, if you will, character, making sure that everybody is in check.
Yeah, and like I was saying earlier, this scene is very pivotal in terms of gauging whether or not Kay is developing free will. And if he does, that's a bad thing. That would make him a candidate for either being rebooted or retired. They might just take him out back and kill him.
Or respond.
Exactly.
Another scene that was very telling in this movie was a kind of obscure scene, but it's where Officer K starts to, I think it was either before or after he was flying out of the LAPD station. Very subvertly, they put in the airline company Pan Am. Well, Pan is the devil. Pan is the devil. That's the name for him, or one of the names, or mythological names, if not. So you know, when you watch these movies through a certain kind of lens, you're able to catch up on these nuances that they put in these subliminal little things here and there. Pan is the devil, and we're talking about a world run by a guy called Tyrell. Not Tyrell, is it Tyrell?
Tyrell, yeah, he was the
Yeah.
original, and then in this movie, a guy named Wallace bought him out after he was killed in the first one.
Okay, gotcha. So, you know, these little subliminals there, you know, it's starting to the people in the know, it's giving you a little bit of insight of what's really kind of going on with this story here and kind of adding up. You see, whenever you watch movies, to the general public, they only see entertainment, but to people who are in the know, they see different messages put into the movies that tell them another story. And that's what we're breaking down for you today. Another thing is the scene in which Officer K goes and he's trying to find out about this child, this kid. Officer K's boss basically wants him to destroy the remains that he found when, in the beginning of the movie, he goes to a replicant's house, and this replicant apparently had a wife in which she gave birth, and birth was, I guess, in this sense, obsolete in this world. And he shows his boss, Officer K shows his boss this, and she goes, "I want you to destroy all of it," and we'll get into the reasons for that why. So, following that, he goes to a gentleman that sits in this very, very interesting. I don't know how to describe it. You'll see when I put the picture in. But he mentions something called, what happens in the film is something referred to as the pre-blackout. Basically, before the whole city kind of went dark, there was a blackout that happened, and
it must have been electromagnetic pulse or something like that. They never really tell you what, but a lot of data and everything was lost. A lot of stored data, digital transmission and things like that were completely wiped out. So obviously there was some sort of an EMP, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And an EMP is basically a nuclear device detonated at a high altitude. So there's the concept of the end of the cycle, which kind of goes into the end of the age. There's the age of Pisces, there's the age of Aquarius, which we're now kind of getting into. There's the age of Leo. There's these different cycles.
Well, before us was the age of Taurus. So
absolutely. So, you know, different cycles represent different ages of existence, you know, different cycles of time that have come and gone through history and that have come and gone through our existence here on Earth. So I think that scene was kind of possibly alluding to pre-blackout. So I guess the end of the age, you know, the end of the cycle had come, everything was destroyed, and now it was rebooted again in the Blade Runner 2049 world that he was living in.
Right, and it's not just the society that got rebooted, but the entire fabric of reality was.
Absolutely. And that goes into another part of the following scene. He goes, when the lights came back on, we were wiped clean. So that's kind of why I kind of thought, you know, well, this is kind of alluding to an end of a cycle, an end of an age. Everything was wiped clean and started anew. It's like they hit the reset button on a simulated world. You know, like you hit the button on your console or your video game, the whole thing shuts off. And then you start it up again. So that's like the new age. You know,
well, you know, the funny thing too that they showed, right? You know, when plain sight in that film. The gentleman that Element's talking about is the character Gaff. In the first film, Gaff was the one at the end who said, you know, perhaps she won't live, but then again, who does? And he's in a nursing home. And he was the guy who would make the origami, and he did the origami of the unicorn in the first film, right?
Yeah.
Now in this one, he does an origami of a bull, showing representing a symbol of the age previous to us right now.
Wow, I didn't even think of that.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that's exactly what I think the movie was trying to communicate to us now
Oh,
as we
man.
live in the age of Pisces.
Each origami was an age.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
That would have freaked me out if he had molded out a fish.
Oh man, dude, that would have been nuts.
And that would have been just
So
like a
that
kick
just
in your face, right?
oh man, I didn't even think of that. That's a good catch. A very good catch, Johnny. I mean, that's I didn't even think of that.
It was right. It's
Um,
right there.
Another scene that kind of goes into the notion of where the society is at in Blade Runner 2049 is the guy wears an all black suit. I don't remember his name. I don't think he even had a name. But he meets Officer K, and he's trying to find out data on where this child or this information pertaining to these bones that he had found in this replicant's play in his property, where he buried them. And the guy goes into this database, and this is where we first meet Wallace's assistant, if you will, his Lilithian assistant. He holds up a chip and he looks at it and he goes, pretty fractured, not much on it. Well, the fracture is the fractals of the universe. It's the fractured of the mind, in which people, I guess that's a whole nother show in itself to get into the explanation of that. But with the whole point of what it was showing was that the soul is in a chip. It's like everybody's been downloaded. Their consciousness, their mind has been put inside a little device that they're archived. It is what we were talking about with the Matrix. It's the soul in the Heil, and the chip is the soul, and they're putting it into the database, so to speak.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's a direct allusion to the Baphomet computer. When Officer K and this this steward who is basically running these archives goes through the archives, it's just row after row after row, a gigantic warehouse full of personal data. Their personalities all uploaded in these tiny little compartments, just like in the Matrix, where all these people are all these souls, if you will, these consciousnesses are contained in these little red pods. It's really it's really breathtaking the way that they shoot that scene too.
Also, those big storage compartments look like giant server rooms.
Yeah.
So he holds up this chip and he says, it looks pretty fractured, huh? Well, then a lady pops up behind him, what was her name again, Johnny? I can't remember her name.
Love. L-U-V. Love.
Her name was Love. Love is the Lilith character in this movie, and she's wearing all white, and Kay is wearing all black. She is above him. She comes from the higher realm, and he's down the bottom. So as he descends this scene, there's a scene where he's descending a staircase where they're about to show the old models of what they've created. She is descending the staircase, and as you can see, she is wearing all white, and Kay is wearing all black. That is your as above, so below. She is from the realms above him, and he's a replicant, so he is below the realm of her. That's just another kind of occultic subliminal message put in there as well. As they descend the staircase, she goes, these were the ancient models, and the ancient models give us a bad name. And what I mentioned was that this is the old creation. This was the previous age, if you will. In our case, this would be the current one in a sense. What she's alluding to here is that the previous age still had free will.
Yeah, that's exactly what she's trying to communicate to the audience through that narrative and that dialogue, is that she's reminding Kay that replicants did have at least the ability to gain free will. If you watch the first Blade Runner, they had to give the replicant a 4-year lifespan so it wouldn't develop free will. But now with these newer models, they give them you know, a normal lifespan, if not even longer than an average human, but they just strip away the free will right from inception.
Yes, and when she's showing Kay these different models, it's a series of let's see here, 5, 10, looks to be about 10 different models, which would kind of be the different replicants that they created before. And I believe that what's being shown here is that this is the old creation before the new, you know, these are the old humans before we came here, and the new age of Aquarius came into play. I believe that, and as I go through the notes, I believe that the age in which is taking place in this specific movie might be the age of Aquarius. What do you think, Johnny?
Yeah, there's a lot of water and water vessel imagery that is shown throughout the movie, like the huge dams that release these waters out of Los Angeles area. The little replicant embryos that are in vessels of water or vessels of fluid. That, you know, the theme of water and flowing water and stagnant water is very prevalent throughout the film, and it's constantly raining, always raining. Notice that?
Yes, it is. I did, yeah. Water being poured down, as in the water pitcher of Aquarius, you know.
Yeah.
Interesting. So I believe that possibly the age in which this takes place is the age of Aquarius. Now, the whole little backstory about the age of Aquarius and why it's so, you might be wondering, well, what's this deal with the age of Aquarius? You know, the New Agers will tell you, oh, it's we're all going to hold hands and we're going to sing Kumbaya and everything's going to be great. Well, no. The age of Aquarius is apparently the age in which the Antichrist comes.
Kumbaya, my lord, no free will. Yeah.
Take our free will.
We don't need it anyway. People vote with free will. That's bullshit.
So, you know, I believe that, you know, so that's the deal with the age of Aquarius. That's apparently when the Antichrist comes. So that's the whole big deal about that. Another scene that illustrates more of this is the fact that Kay goes to, he's Love is touring him through the facility, and she shows him these little balls that are what Wallace, he was a Love says Wallace is a what did she say? A data hoarder. Well, a data hoarder is data meaning souls, because Wallace in this movie is Jehovah, and he is collecting and storing souls.
Obviously, he's Jehovah. They smack you right in the face with it. He is the demiurge. He even talks about conquering the Garden of Eden. Well, do you have that line that he says? I didn't quote it verbatim by any means. But,
yes, I do.
Oh,
let me see here. Let's take a look and see where that is. He says, he basically said, we make angels in the service of civilization. I made bad angels once, and I make good ones now. That's how I took us to the 9 new worlds. We lost our stomachs to the slaves unless engineered, but I can only make so many. We can restorm Eden and retake our ... And he doesn't say anything after that.
That's crazy. Okay. I mean, right there, that's just illustrating the Gnostic perspective of the creator. He is the demiurge. He's the architect. He's the designer. He's the composer. And as above, so below. He's now here on Earth.
Yeah. And so he data mines these little souls. I put that in there. It doesn't mention that in the movie, but Love says Mr. Wallace is a data hoarder. He likes to hoard data. And I just thought, well, those are souls. Because when Love takes out these little balls that have data on it that were interviews with Harrison Ford's character in the original Blade Runner from interviewing the replicants. But what it's showing you here is that those souls are basically not just data, but they're people's consciousnesses inside those things. Which this goes into the whole thing of AI, and AI being everybody getting tied into a hive mind of data, collecting data into little balls that they can figure out their consciousness. You know, the consciousness can be mapped out, I guess, from the collection of data that make a personality type. And that might not be correct. I'm just, suspecting. But when we see the whole society now collecting everybody's data, what is the purpose?
Well, I think you're dead on about that. I think that's a great allegory to what they're trying to communicate to us through that film. I think they are using that type of illusion where they're not showing how things are going to be. I think they're showing the way things really are right now and always have been.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree. And this is why we hear amongst a lot of people that do any research into these kind of topics, this whole mark of the beast thing. I think the beast is the AI, and or the comprised of which would be the Antichrist, the devil, whatever it comprises of. And like you said, that kind of is in a lot of ways already kind of in place. If the fact is that Jehovah creates souls and this is his world, then aren't we already in the system? I think what's happening with this specific instance is that you'll never be able to ascend. You'll forever respawn into that system being a slave, basically.
Well, I mean,
just like the replicants.
You have a social security number, right? So do I, and so does probably everybody listening in on this. I guess it depends on what country you live in, but I'm sure your nation has some sort of cataloging system by where your identity is cemented and cataloged and stored.
And I think a lot of what the replicants are showing here, or at least what the purpose of K and the replicants were, is that K is kind of like humanity. They are disposable people in which they're tied into this system. But K tries to find knowledge. He tries to be above being nothing more than a replicant. He's trying to become more than human, or I'm trying to become human. In our case, we're trying to become more than human.
And I was wondering, because there's so many allusions to biblical characters where you have Lux, who is Lilith, and you have Wallace, who is Jehovah. I was wondering, well, what role does K fulfill? And I was wondering, at first I thought, well, is he sort of the Christ-like figure? And even throughout the movie, they kind of want to hint that he might be. But as the plot unfolds, I'm beginning to see he's more of a St. Thomas.
Yeah, more like a Thomas character or something like that. I want to lead into what you went into about the bull and about that. Who was it that was doing the origami shape? What was his name?
Gaff.
Gaff made in this scene. He made an origami of a Taurus, and Johnny, you hit that thought that I never would have come to that conclusion unless you mentioned it, that the year before this was Taurus. We're now in the age, or leaving the age, of Pisces.
And also the funny thing is too, the man who made it is old and in a retirement home. It's like his day is gone. He's from the old world. He's pre-blackout.
Yeah, he's from the previous age.
Yeah.
And also, the Taurus represents Aldebaran, which is the Heil.
Yeah, the gateway right to the Heil.
Another interesting thing that Love says when you first meet Mr. Wallace is she says, Mr. Wallace goes, an angel should never enter the kingdom of heaven without a gift. Now, this struck me because I didn't understand what this meant. That an angel should never enter the kingdom without a gift. Johnny, what do you think might be, I don't know what that means.
easy. I think that's easy. An angel cannot enter the kingdom of heaven without knowledge. That's the gift.
Oh wow, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
like I said, like I've talked about in private hangouts and in previous podcasts here and previous shows. You know, you don't get to ascend without passing a test, and that gift of knowledge is what you need to bring to the table for that to happen.
Why do you think that that is? What would be the purpose?
Boy, like what? I'm that.
Yeah, that's a big question.
Why just stump me like that? I don't know.
I
That
don't know
is,
either.
I guess, in some ways, it's a type of way of proving oneself. You know, they can't just let any old idiot in.
It might be in order to understand where I guess let's just use the term. In order to understand what the creator is coming from, you must know how he creates. You must have knowledge of how his, it's like, if you're going to go to work, you got to know how work works. You got to know where to take your papers, or if you work in a shop, you got to know where things are at. You have to know how he works in order to get him, otherwise you don't get him. You got to know how to be inside the house and respected it. In other words, I lack of a better term, and understand where he's coming from. In other words, you have to have his mind. I don't know. Who knows? It's just a thought. Interesting thought, though.
Well, I think maybe, in terms of gaining gnosis, you have to create yourself. You yourself have to create something, and understand that type of, I guess you could say, cosmogonic workflow. That's just something that, I, as a Gnostic, am learning day by day. And in terms of what exactly is the basis of my knowledge, and what exactly does my gnosis comprise of, and where am I right now, where am I going, and you're asking yourself the same thing too, Element.
Yeah. Another interesting thing that happens is that Wallace, who is Jehovah in this movie, you come across a replicant that he creates, or he just created, and she falls from this plastic onto a black cube. And, well, basically, the way I saw it was that she kind of got respawned, but I think she just got created. And as you go through the scene, this is where he goes, the first thought is to preserve the clay. And he then says, the first thought is to preserve the clay. Before we even know what we are, we fear to lose it. And then he goes, happy birthday, as he holds this face of this replicant woman in his hands. And the birthday is the allegory to being born into this world, basically.
And as above, so below, he laments the fact that her womb is barren because she isn't part of the living. And after he says happy birthday, he guts her with a big knife.
Also, she falls from the sky to the bottom. As above, she falls to below.
Exactly. Yeah, she comes right out of the portal, out of the bag, and there's, she's just covered in this amniotic fluid. But even though she resembles life, she has no soul. She's a sterile, unliving organism.
I think another way from that movie that we saw, Johnny, about the illustration of Eve being left and Jehovah moving up, out of this creation that he was making. Why would he say, and I got what you said there, that her womb is barren because she is of the non-living. I wonder if that's kind of like a vengeful act amongst Lilith, that he left. So he's upset that she did not create the way he wanted her to.
Yeah, you know what? That's a really good point. That might be one perspective on that, but I, I think basically him killing his new replicant is just frustration, an illustration of his vanity and pride.
Yeah,
Because Jehovah, man, he is the epitome of all the seven deadly sins, you know.
absolutely.
And Wallace, of course, is as well. I mean, the guy is just brimming, boiling with rage.
And he also
And
says, he
go
also
on.
goes on to mention that we make angels in the service of civilization. I made bad ones once, and I make good ones now. That's how I took us to the 9 new worlds. And he goes, we lost our stomach to the slaves unless engineered, but I can only make so many. Very Gnostic.
Yeah.
We can restorm Eden and retake our. And then that's it. And I put in retake our mother, which is Lilith.
Yeah. And how do you, and speaking of Lilith, I mean, how do you find Love to be more of a Lilithian character?
Like just how I see her as being that.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's because number one, she's directly aside to Jehovah. She's the main character to Mr. Wallace, and she's directly there. And you remember, and I touched upon this just a few minutes back, how Officer K's boss wanted to destroy um, the bones that were found because later on, Love goes at looking after them. She wants to find who this person was that created life. And Lilith hates life. And it's because I guess she can't create life like Jehovah can. And this is where we see this equality agenda that is being pushed now and trying to get a woman in the White House and all this stuff. I think that a lot has to do with Lilith and her rage and anger towards wanting to be able to be a creator in the way that Jehovah was. And
Right.
so
And
her
because
vengefulness is that.
she's just as barren as the other replicants. And, that's something that she hates. That's something she can't stand. And when she finds out that one's actually do something that she can't do, and indicative of having a soul and ergo free will, that just turns her into the ultimate villain of this film.
Yeah, and so that's kind of how I see it. Also, Terrell says basically Terrell's final trick was procreation, and then he lost. And he's talking about, in my opinion, how to mimic the way of the things of the Pleroma. He's trying to learn how to create to the perfection at which the Pleramic world or heaven that he learned. He's trying to replicate how to make that happen, I guess, and he's failing at it over and over and over again.
Right. Wallace says that Tyrell, who was in the first, the CEO of the creator of the replicants in the first film, had a secret design where he could make replicants who could reproduce, and that's where we find the bones of this replicant that had obviously given birth at some point due to the fact that her ilium and her sacrum were fractured.
Yeah, and as he walks out of this room, once he guts this replicant, he leans over to Love and goes, "You're the best angel of them all." Because as this movie Johnny and I watched, he wanted to have a companion. He wanted to create. Johnny, you remember in that scene where he goes, he wanted to find love, and then
yeah.
and then in this scene, her name is Love. So, there you go. Insane. As we move forward, there's a scene that shows Officer K by a dead tree. In my opinion, the dead tree is the tree of life. It has basically been cut off. It's been dead. And I think that that's what that scene was illustrating. The next scene that goes on here is another androgynous reference, which is that of which Kay brings along his Joy little girlfriend or whatever. And he's looking at data codes, trying to find out the connection between this kid and where this thing is coming from. And in the scene, because the girl that he brings along on this little emulator is a hologram, she kind of sits right where he's sitting, and her face is just showing like perfectly through his face. And so it's like a man and a woman of androgyny.
Oh, that's a good point that you bring up that scene. In the beginning of the film, Officer K kills a rogue replicant, and he gets a bonus check. These replicant Blade Runners do get paid just like real people. And what he does is he buys this thing called an emanator. And that's how, angels and aeons reproduce, is through emanation. That's how new souls are created, is through emanation. I found that funny how they called it an emanator. And the emanator is a little device that will allow Officer K to take Joy off of that sealing harness so he can take her with him wherever he goes. Basically making her portable. And that's very, very strange. She doesn't have free will by any means, but she is released. She is unshackled now from her cell, which was again that sealing harness. And only through emanation does she have that mobility.
So that's kind of almost alluding to people breaking out of their own cells, of their own holographic avatar nature, right? They're like the Matrix.
Right, yeah. It gives them that kind of extensibility of mobility.
And he's looking at these little data charts, these gene imprints, these data imprints of genomes or gene codes. And I think it was Joy that says data makes a man, or maybe it was Officer K, data makes a man, and data is the programming code. Just like we were mentioning with our Matrix breakdown, we were talking about how the soul is like the game player playing a game, and your soul would be the player, and your body would be the avatar.
Right.
And through however the system works, your mind is able to drive your avatar around. And so the physical body is made up of data, of genes or genomes, which would be the programming code to your avatar.
This scene was perfect about as above, so below, and the difference, the physical differences between those realms. Okay. Officer K is looking at a genome reader where you get to see, the Gattaca, the DNA. And Officer K says to Joy, I'm made up of 4 parts. And she says, yeah, and I'm only made up of 2. Because she's binary code and he's DNA.
Wow, that would be the...
And that's where they fuse, they meld together when she's looking at it into the genome reader.
Oh, wow. And that would make 4. Wow.
Right.
Shoot. Well, that also kind of goes into Officer K. Officer K had 4, right? And she had 2 because she was binary. So that would
right. We're talking the binary is the mind, the 4 or the DNA is the body. One is as above the 2 parts, whereas so below is the 4 parts.
Also, the fourth genome could be like the factor at which comes from, in this case, Jehovah.
Right.
Wow. Then he says, a boy and a girl, it's impossible. The two can't have identical data. One is fake and one is the original. I thought that this was alluding to androgyny. What do you think?
Yeah, I did too. And it was also funny when they were showing like the X and O matches and stuff, but between the two genetic charts when they were comparing them, you know, they showed the seal of Saturn, the two X's put together.
Also, this is just a side note to you, Johnny, that the numbers for the man is 3 and the numbers of the woman is 23 for the two
I didn't know.
genes.
I didn't know that, huh?
I just added them up. That's interesting. Also, and I'm going to kind of go a little bit more quicker through this, that there was a specific disease that which it was the, I think the female died of, which is Galatian syndrome. And that's actually a disease in the Bible, is under the book of Galatians. There, it mentioned that. It said, you will know that it was because of an illness that I first preached the gospel to you. So that's a real thing. And the boy just disappears, referencing what Kay says. The boy just disappears, referencing possible Adam and Eve, or as Johnny said, this could be possibly Officer K being of the showing him as the character of the Gnostic sense of Jesus. Maybe he just disappeared.
Yeah, that's the thing that I couldn't figure out either, because you know Christ's life was undocumented for years and years until he became about the age of 30. And that's one of the things that I was wondering if they were alluding to, or if he was just becoming kind of that fact was just becoming a composite of the K character. And you know, everything in this movie is named for a reason. It's shown for a reason. Every shot is a calling card, if you will. I mean, the entire movie, and I still cannot figure out why they chose the letter K for Officer K. You know, in terms of his identity. You know, what are they referencing?
Well, K is the 11th letter in the alphabet. I don't know if that has any significance, probably, but I don't know. Also, we have a scene in which water is being poured down from these dams that funnel the water from the other side. So this is where we have this Age of Aquarius thing. In the Bible, it mentions that I think it was one of the apostles asked Jesus, when will we know when the end has come? And he goes, follow the man with the water pitcher. And well, the water pitcher is the Age of Aquarius, basically. And as we see in this specific scene, water is being poured like a water pitcher, flowing like a waterfall.
Yeah, it's cascading. Yeah, it's cascading from above to the below. It's cascading out of the Hyle into the Corposa, ushering in that new age.
And also we have another scene of which is showing the wreckage as he goes to this garbage processing part of the city in LA. And the LA wreckage, and what this was illustrating here, is the end of the cycle. It was the remnants left over from the previous age after the blackout. We also have a scene in which Kay finds a book trying to find this kid that he's trying to find. And there's this book he comes across where all these kids are working as slaves for this guy. And he opens the book and there's a big chunk of a page missing. That page missing, I mentioned to Johnny when we were going over this, that page might be the end of the age. The end of the age has been gone.
Right, they just erased it. They ripped it out.
And maybe that age was Pisces, the one that Jesus was in, and they don't want people to know about it.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was thinking too. They just wanted to erase that knowledge, because why would they want to erase that knowledge? Well, because they don't want people to learn about these esoteric subjects and possibly ascend. They want to stop that cycle from happening.
And we also have another scene of which in this book, as he's looking, there's a little tray, a little ashtray with a horse on it, and I think that's a Goetia, right?
Yeah, I would say so.
And it's an ashtray, which represents like the destruction of the previous cycle and humanity being destroyed in this tray of ash. It's just an ash that's left over. What we see here, another interesting thing, is he finds this little dog, and he says it's a relic from his past, well, I said it's a relic from his past.
A dog? Wait, wasn't it a horse? Like a carved horse?
Was it a horse? I couldn't really get a good idea of.
I think it was a horse. Yeah, I believe so.
Okay, gotcha. And then Joy says, "I always told you that you were special," which this is another possible allusion to this, possibly Officer K being of this, trying to be illustrated here in the Gnostic sense of being a Jesus character in this movie. It's a possibility.
God, that's something I'm still trying to figure out.
Yeah. Let's see, what else do we got here? This is a side note, but it's unrelated, but the whole equality thing that we see now being pushed, where everybody has to be equal, transgender, gays, men, women, dogs, cats, whatever. This, I believe, is another example of the push for androgyny, the mending of the two species. Why this is, I still can't figure it out. I still can't understand what the purpose behind that would be. I think it might go to the fact of the original creation, which I believe, and Johnny and I have discussed, possibly is androgynous, but that still doesn't explain.
Yeah, what's the motive? Why go back to the androgyne exactly? What will that do for the grand narrative? Right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it still doesn't, it still doesn't make sense to me at this moment in time.
We'll probably figure it out eventually.
Yeah, we will. Last thing I damn do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
we run into the memory maker. We run into the memory maker, which is as I go through the last bit of notes here that I have. The memory maker is a very interesting character, which you'll see at the end here. The memory maker was a girl that made memories. All the replicants had these memories that were implanted within them, and she made them. And she was living in this sterile bubble, this little kind of room, compartmentalized thing, where she just sat there and made memories, and she made one of the first scenes was her making a little memory of kids having a birthday party. Obviously, the birthday party is like being born into the age, just as Jehovah said, or Wallace says, "Happy birthday," and then there she was making a birthday cake. So, and you said something, Johnny, about her. You said that she was bought out by. Well, she mentions that Wallace tried to buy her out, but she didn't take it or whatever, So that's interesting. And then she says, "If you want to imagine, if I wanted to see the world, I had to imagine it." So that's just interesting there.
Yeah, that is true. What character is she emulating? What character is she representing? I wonder if she's perhaps maybe the archetype of Sophia.
That's a very good possibility. Now that I think about it, I was trying to find the Sophia character in this thing. I think that's probably the closest person I think I could have come to.
Yeah, and this movie would not neglect that. Especially since it is so Gnostic. You don't just forget about
leave Sophia out.
Yeah, you don't leave her out. Exactly.
We move to the scene where he takes this little horse and he shows it to this guy, and he goes, there's only, he mentions that there's only one place. He was talking about this wood that this little horse was made of, and he goes, there's only one place where there used to be radioactivity that strong, because he was taking analysis of this wood and it was very radioactive, I think. Well, radioactivity and also frequency represents kind of the end of an age. It's like a big boom goes off, and that is equated to like nuclear energy. And I think Officer K goes, it matches a dirty bomb, and I reference that to being the end of the cycle. And he goes, there's only one place that dirty, and nobody lives there. Well, because it's the end of the age. It could be the previous age. This was also something that we quoted from our previous hangout, talking about the Matrix, which was the fact that Matrix, in the Matrix Animatrix movie, nuclear fusion was used to power the machines called O1, and that nuclear fusion was the primary power source for the machines. And the minds of the pod humans are also combined as a form of biocomputing neural network. Each human's mind within the Matrix is also a subprocessor of the virtual world. So maybe, you know what it could be is that maybe the mind generates a nuclear type of, you know, frequency, or it generates a nuclear, I guess the word for
like
it
a
is,
residue, a residue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It emanates some kind of nuclear thing.
Yeah, because what city does he go into? The ruins, or what, Las Vegas? I guess they're trying to.
Oh gosh, I can't. Yeah, the city that's all like orange. I don't remember what they
Yeah,
called
it's just
it. I don't
covered
think they
in
did.
fallout. It's like
Yeah,
this
pretty much.
orange dust. Yeah, and that's where Officer K eventually finds Harrison Ford. You know, the character of Rick Deckard, who's living in exile.
Absolutely, and you know, another example of this of the age was that there's these holograms of like Elvis Presley and Marilyn Monroe. You know, this was all representing previous ages and previous cycles as time has gone on. And he goes, "Got a name?" And he goes, "That's not." And then he gives Harrison Ford's character his serial number, and he goes, "That's not a name, that's a serial number." Well, this is equated to kind of like our social security number in a way, you know, kind of in a sense that in many ways, another way of looking at it is that we kind of are replicants in the sense that our prison number is our social security number. It's like Jehovah's stamp of approval on every avatar that he's created.
Yeah, this is kind of like what I was talking about earlier in this show. You know, it's like, you know, you have a social security number, so do I. And this scene is something that illustrates that. It's trying to communicate that to the viewer.
Yeah, and then he asks, you know, I got some questions for you. And what he's asking is he wants gnosis. He wants to know what's going on. And he also says, I showed them how to scramble the records, which is the cycle, and cover their own tracks. Everyone has a part. Mine was to leave. Then the blackout came and paved over everything. In the sense, this is the end of the cycle. Did you want to find the child? No, because we were being hunted. Sometimes you got to, in order sometimes to love someone, you got to be a stranger. And this is what I thought possibly was an allegory to the monad.
Right. For instance, we as humans cannot know the monad. He's unknowable. In order for right.
And we see Joy looking at tanks of these little fish, or whatever is inside them, representing kind of like possibly the age of Pisces, humanity being observed, or the age of Aquarius.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. I'm thinking it could be maybe an allegory to both. You know, there are little aquariums for fish. These were the old replicants from the age of Pisces, the previous age, but also at the same time, they're water vessels. Ergo, another representation of the Aquarian age, much like the dam and the constant rain and everything like that.
Also, the different fish tanks kind of represent the different worlds in a way. And as we wrap up the final note here, final two notes here, we see that Officer K gets captured by Love, the Lilithian girl in the white. And she goes, we're going home. We're going off-world. Because what's being shown here is, and as that's happening, they're crossing over that big giant dam, which the dam kind of like represents the veil. They're going out through the veil into the other world. They're crossing the veil, and they have this big fight, and he drowns Love in this big battle that they have. And
again, water imagery.
Exactly. You see water, and she's below the water, and he's above the water. So it's like he has taken over her position, not in the bad sense, but she's kept down in the corporeal, and he's ascended. He's defeated the devil. The final note is where we find out who the girl who created Memories was. And he sits to him and asks Harrison Ford's character, "You're free to go meet your daughter now." And he says, well, actually, I interjected, my mistake. He goes, "You're free to meet your daughter now." Well, the girl that created the Memories was Harrison Ford's daughter that he had with Rachel from the first movie. That was his mom, her mom, the girl. So the girl that created Memories was Harrison Ford's character's daughter.
So in many ways, Harrison Ford, Rick Deckard, and Rachel were Adam and Eve.
So Rachel, Deckard, and who else was Adam and Eve?
Well, I'm thinking, Rick Deckard is, the Harrison Ford character. And then Rachel, I guess, must have been Adam and Eve, right?
I never thought of that, but yeah, now that I see that, I was trying to figure out who Adam and Eve was in this thing when I saw the different, when they were looking at the genes of man and woman, I said, there's Adam and Eve going on in here, but I don't know where it's at. So now that you mentioned that, that's interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, we don't really know who Cain and Abel's going to be, because that's probably going to be in the next movie, which I hope they don't make another one, but...
Oh, God. And it's going to be worse.
Yeah, it's going to be worse.
It's going to be worse because this is like the best rendition of what they've gotten so far. But now they're just going to mess it up. So anyways.
I thought it was a good movie overall, yeah. I mean, it definitely was something worth podcasting about, that's for sure.
Absolutely. So that's the coverage of our analysis of Blade Runner 2049. If you haven't seen it, I do recommend you watch it. It was a very good movie. And, a lot of Gnostic, if you're interested in learning about Gnosticism, or if you are trying to have a better understanding of things, I think that's a good movie to watch. Definitely had a lot of good. It definitely was a very Gnostic movie. That and the Lego movie too, man. The Lego movie was hilarious.
Yeah, we got to cover the Lego movie one day. I know, I'm serious. It has to be done. But what did I learn today? Today I learned more about via Blade Runner 2049. And I think the crux of the movie is not so much about the hypostatic dynamics between the Hyle and the Corposa, but I think it's more illustrative of the passage of an age. And I really do feel that way, especially when they sum that up with the origami of the bull and all the water imagery. Because, as we were talking tonight, I was thinking about, I'm replaying the movie in my head. I've already seen it twice. I now own it, and it's only $14.99 off YouTube if you want standard definition. And to sum it up, I really think that this movie is a narrative on the passing of ages.
I agree. And the coming one too, I think.
Right.
Because the coming age of Aquarius is that fraught with technology. And I think that shows, in this Blade Runner movie, shows that better than anything I've seen, I think. So what I learned was that, definitely learned a lot more about Gnosticism. I learned a lot more about this whole Lilith character. I learned a lot more about how movies are beginning to not only show these things, and now allows me a more intensive study or research to look into when I start seeing more Gnostic movies. And thanks to you, Johnny, I now know about Gnosticism, so now I can look even deeper into where all this is coming from.
Yeah, we just have to figure out what is the motive of androgyny. God, yeah. Why they got to bring that shit back?
Oh man, that's a really deep question. I'm gonna sit on that tonight. I'm gonna figure that out this weekend. I
You
mean, yeah,
bet.
I hope so. I hope
Yeah,
I
at
can
least
figure it out.
like point us in the right direction here because boy, they really, really want that to happen. And it already has, but why do they need it again? I don't know.
Maybe this is this one thought that maybe the demiurge are androgynous, which is like Jehovah's. The devil wants to make his own creation. He does, he does replicate what he learned in the pleroma, but he also wants to create his own deal. So maybe the idea of gender that he wants to create is his own separate creation. Like he's trying to create his own gender that reproduce their own ways so that they can reproduce how he wants them to be created. Who knows?
We'll find out, and when we do, you could be sure we'll tell you.
All right. With that being said, thanks for tuning in, and hope you guys enjoyed our analysis of Blade Runner 2049. And we'll be talking to you again soon.
See ya.
Bye bye.